Welcome back to the Integrative Therapists, the space where nervous system wisdom meets everyday human experience. This is a place to pause, exhale, and meet yourself honestly. Around here, we mix science with soul, humor with healing, and give language to the truth your body has been whispering for years, sometimes quietly, sometimes loudly. So let's begin by arriving together in this space. I invite you to take a gentle breath in through your nose and a longer, unhurried breath out through your mouth. Let your shoulders fall away from your ears, soften your jaw, and untense anything that's been bracing. If your mind is still busy, that's okay. If your body feels restless or heavy, that's okay too. This is just a moment to let your system settle and know that you don't have anywhere else to be right now in this moment. So before we go any further, a gentle reminder: this space is for education and self-support. It isn't therapy or medical care. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't. And if this brings something up that feels heavy, you deserve support, and you don't have to carry this alone. Reach out to a professional in your area. So settle in and let's begin. I want to first start off by offering a gentle heads up that today's episode centers around grief during the holidays. Nothing here needs to be taken in all at once. Listen in a way that feels safest and most supportive for you. Before we move any further, I want to pause and name something important. Grief does not look the same for everyone. Some people feel it as heaviness, some people feel it as tenderness, and some feel it quietly in the background. And some genuinely feel okay, even joyful during the holidays, and none of those responses are wrong. Enjoying the holidays does not mean you loved any less. Laughing does not mean you've moved on too fast. And feeling light does not mean grief isn't present in your life. Because grief is not a single emotion. It's a relationship, and relationships change depending on the season, the moment, and your capacity in general. Some years it may sit very close, some years it may soften just a little, and some years it might surprise you by feeling quieter than you may have expected. All of this is normal. So if this episode doesn't reflect your experience exactly, that doesn't mean something is missing in you. It simply means grief is showing up differently right now, and that too is allowed. I want to begin with a small story. After my mom passed back in 2015, I remember walking into a store one December, weeks before Christmas, and everything looked the same. The lights, the decorations, the music playing softly overhead. On the outside, nothing has changed. But inside me, something had. I stood there holding a familiar ornament, one I had picked up a dozen times before, but suddenly it felt very heavy in my hands. Not because it weighed more, because the meaning had shifted for me. I put it back down, and then I picked it up again, and then I stood there longer than made sense, pretending to read the tag while my chest began to tighten, my throat tightened, everything around me began to look smaller. People moved about with their carts full of wrapping paper and cheer, and I remember thinking, how is everyone doing this so easily? Because this was the first holiday where I realized that grief doesn't announce itself loudly. It's not something you see on the outside. It's something that sits quietly, and it changes. It changes the way the world fits around you. The season kept moving, but I was standing in a different one, and I didn't have words for it yet. But my body knew. Nothing is the same now. That's when I learned something important. Grief doesn't only live in loss. It lives in contrast, in the moments that used to feel simple, in the traditions that suddenly feel so unfamiliar. And during the holidays, it can often land heavier for some of us. So today in this episode, we're making room for that version of grief. the quiet one, the one that shows up while everything else looks normal on the outside. We're not fixing it. We're not rushing it. We're letting our nervous system breathe inside this new world. The holidays can amplify grief for a few different reasons. First, there's contrast, what I was just referring to, where there's joy and there's happiness and everyone's kind of in that holiday cheer, but you're carrying loss. And this is felt in your nervous system as it's constantly scanning our environment and comparing what is with what was, trying to reconcile this information. And for some people, that contrast may feel sharp and heavy. For others, it may feel quieter or even barely noticeable. Both responses are normal. Second, there's memory activation. So, smells, songs, rituals, they live close to the emotional brain. Neuroscience tells us that memories connected to attachment and loss are often stored in the limbic system, the part of the brain that doesn't follow logic or timelines. So when a familiar song plays or a tradition appears, your body remembers before your mind has time to catch up. Sometimes those memories will bring ache, sometimes they'll bring warmth, sometimes both all at once, and even sometimes nothing at all. If the season does feel lighter for you, that doesn't mean you're avoiding grief or doing it wrong. It just simply reflects a different way of relating to grief in this season, and that's okay. Third, there's the pressure all around us. Pressure to be grateful, pressure to be festive, pressure to show up happy for the holidays. But grief doesn't operate on social calendars. Grief isn't guided by the time of year. It doesn't quiet itself for celebrations. So when the world is louder with joy, grief can often feel louder too. And here's something important. When grief is paired with pressure, the nervous system responds and it often shifts into protection mode, not because something is wrong, but because safety feels uncertain. And beneath that nervous system response, there's often something deeper happening too. Grief doesn't just affect how our body feels, it changes how we understand the world that we're living in. In psychology, especially in trauma and bereavement research, there's a term for this kind of rupture. It's called assumptive world collapse. Here's what that means in human language. All of us walk around through life with an invisible set of assumptions, beliefs we don't even realize that we're carrying. Things like, the world is predictable, people I love will be here, life makes sense. If I do the right things, things will mostly work out. These assumptions quietly shape how safe the world feels for us. So grief doesn't just take someone or something from us. It shatters the framework we were living inside. And suddenly the world begins to feel unsafe. Time feels strange. The future feels unfamiliar. And the version of life you expected no longer exists. That's why grief can feel so existential. You're not just missing someone, you're trying to live inside a world that no longer matches the one you knew. During the holidays, when so much depends on what's familiar and expected, that rupture can become even more pronounced. The season keeps repeating itself. While your internal world has fundamentally changed, your nervous system isn't confused. It's responding exactly as it should to a world that shifted without your consent. Our minds want direction, a plan, a way through. So we do what we've been taught. We turn grief into a task, something to process, manage, and fix. But grief isn't asking for efficiency, and it isn't asking for a resolution. Which brings us to something important. Grief is not a problem to solve, it's a relationship to tend. We've been taught to approach grief like a task. Process it, heal it, move through it, get to the other side. But grief doesn't have a finish line. It's not linear. It's not something you complete. It's something you learn how to carry. And how we carry that grief can look so different from person to person. In psychology, grief is also understood as a response to our attachment, not to just the loss. Our nervous systems form bonds that help regulate us, give us meaning, and shape our sense of safety in the world. So when someone dies, the body isn't only responding to the fact that they're gone, it's also responding to what that relationship provided, what it required, or what it cost us. Modern grief research helps explain this in a way that's far more compassionate than the stories many of us were taught. In contemporary grief psychology, there are two frameworks that help make some sense of why grief may look differently from person to person. There's a grief theory called the continuing bonds theory, and this reframes how we understand grief. So rather than viewing healing as letting go, it recognizes that people maintain internal relationships with those who have died. These bonds take different forms depending on the nature of the relationship. For some, for some, the connection will soften into a memory, a warmth, or a felt sense of being accompanied by the loved one. For others, especially when love was tangled with pain, it can become distance, neutrality, or a boundary. The bond doesn't vanish, it just finds a form that the body can now live with. And another model is called the dual process model of grief, which shows that people naturally move back and forth between these two states. There are moments where it's orientated by loss, sadness, yearning, and even remembering. And then there are moments that are more orientated toward restoration, functioning, relief, moving forward, or simply getting through the day. Neither means grief is being avoided. This movement is how the nervous system regulates. For people who have experienced long-term stress, caregiving, conflict, or an emotional strain, the system may spend more time in restoration, not because love was absent, but because stability is needed. This is why grief can take so many different forms. Research has also shown that, again, no rule book here, just what has been found in some studies that are out there, that the level of grief can sometimes be connected to the bond and the relationship that you had with that person. So that could look like someone that had a deeply connected, emotionally close bond. The grief will often be very heavy, very profound, and aching. And then those that maybe had a more complicated or conflicted relationship, that can bring about mixed emotions, sadness alongside anger, guilt, or even a sense of relief. And then a distance, painful or stressful relationship, those may bring about very little grief at all, or a sense of calm once the struggle ends. This isn't avoidance, it's biology responding honestly to the truth of the bond, and relief especially deserves to be named here. Relief is a valid grief response. When a relationship involved perhaps long-term stress, caregiving, conflict, or even a sense of suffering. I want to share this personally because I know how much guilt can live here. When my mom passed away, she was in stage 4 lung cancer, and watching the disease take hold of her, watching her body change, watching the light dim in ways that I couldn't stop, was incredibly, profoundly painful for me. And alongside the sadness, there was also something else. There was a quiet sense of relief when she was able to transition. Not relief that she was gone, but relief that she was no longer suffering here. Relief that her body didn't have to keep fighting something that was slowly eating away at her from the inside out. That feeling confused me at first, because no one had ever really talked to me about gratitude existing beside grief, or relief showing up in a moment that is supposed to look only one way. But that relief wasn't a lack of love. It was love responding to the end of pain. We've often been taught that grief is supposed to look a certain way, but love doesn't express itself through grief in only one form. Grief can also reflect how love, attachment, and relationship were held inside your body. And this matters because so many people feel guilt when their grief doesn't match the expectations that have been set out there. And they wonder, why am I not more upset? Why do I feel a bit relieved? Why am I okay? Science offers a gentler explanation for this. Your nervous system is responding honestly to the quality, complexity, and the emotional cost of that bond. And because bonds are often so very complex, grief doesn't stay the same. It changes shape over time. It doesn't disappear, but it does evolve. And during the holidays, grief often doesn't want solutions. It doesn't want optimism. and it rarely responds well to being told to look on the bright side. What it wants is room to show up as it is, room to move at its own pace, room to coexist with moments of rest, reflection, or even joy. Sometimes caring for grief means slowing down. Sometimes it means continuing to live in ways that still feel life giving for us. Neither is wrong. Grief isn't pulling you away from life, it's asking you to stop fighting your own experience, to let honesty be enough. Honest about what hurts, honest about what you miss, honest about maybe what feels too much for you. There is no rule that says grief and celebration cannot coexist, but there is harm in pretending that grief simply isn't there. And there's also harm in believing that you must feel grief in a particular way for it to be valid. Both suppression and self-comparison can pull us away from what's real. And here's why. Research on emotional suppression shows that when we push feelings down, the body doesn't forget them. They don't disappear, they just relocate. And these suppressed emotions are often linked to increased physiological stress, elevated cortisol, higher heart rates, muscle tension, and greater nervous system activation. In other words, when we don't allow grief to move, the body has to work harder to contain it. From a nervous system perspective, suppression signals threat, not strength. The body reads unexpressed emotion as unfinished business, something that still needs guarding. This is why grief held in silence often shows up as exhaustion, irritability, numbness, or a sense of being on edge for no clear reason. This doesn't mean you need to feel everything all at once. It just means that the body benefits when we don't force ourselves to be something we're not. But when grief is acknowledged, even gently, even quietly, something can shift. So neuroscience tells us that when we name an emotion, even quietly, something important happens in the brain. I don't know if you've ever heard of name it to tame it, but this is very similar to that concept. So strong emotions like grief are first processed in the limbic system, which is fast, reactive, and memory-based. This part of the brain doesn't care about logic or timing. It just knows that something matters and it stays on alert. When an emotion stays unnamed or unacknowledged, the limbic system keeps sounding that alarm. The body stays braced, tense, or overwhelmed. But when we name that emotion, it activates a prefrontal cortex, a part of the brain that helps us make meaning, helps us feel oriented, and helps us have that sense of safety. It doesn't erase the emotion, it just simply reorganizes it. So the calming doesn't come from grief going away. It comes from the body realizing, hey, this feeling has a place here. It's seen, and I'm not alone with it. That's a key distinction. When grief is acknowledged, the body often asks for less effort, not more. Support can be simple, quiet, or entirely optional. Here are a few simple ways to offer that support to yourself. Nothing big, nothing performative, just small acts of permission. And permission also includes doing none of these if that is what feels right for you. So one could look like creating a grief ritual, something special to you. I want to share a small ritual that brought me comfort after my mom passed. It was my first Christmas and everything felt very unfamiliar. So many traditions that just didn't seem to fit the same way anymore. And I remember going out and buying a special ornament just for her. Nothing elaborate, just something that felt like her. And each year when I take it out, I pause, I say her name quietly. Sometimes I smile, sometimes I tear up, sometimes I do both. The ornament doesn't make that grief disappear, but it gives it a place. It reminds me that she's not erased from the season. She's included in it, just in a different way. So if it feels right for you, your ritual can be very simple. It can be lighting a candle for who or what you miss, saying their name quietly, letting them be included in the holiday, but just in a different way, as I mentioned. Grief can often soften when it's given a place to land. Another is maybe setting a grief boundary this season. After grief is given a place to land, it often asks for some protection. Protection of your energy, protection of your capacity. You're allowed to leave early. You're allowed to skip traditions altogether if that's what feels right for you. And you're allowed to say, I don't have capacity for this right now. This isn't selfish, it's regulation, it's self-care. From a nervous system perspective, boundaries are how the body restores safety. They reduce overwhelm before it tips into shutdown or collapse. A boundary isn't closing yourself off, it's creating the conditions where you can stay connected without burning out. Next is pacing your emotional energy. You don't need to show up for everyone in the same way that you always have. Grief already asks a lot of your system, so pacing matters. Your nervous system isn't designed for constant input, especially during loss. It needs space between moments of connection to reset and to settle. Think of your energy like a breath. Inhale, connection; exhale, rest. Both are necessary, so if you notice fatigue, irritability, or numbness creeping in, that's not failure. That's your body asking for a simple pause. And finally, there's an invitation that doesn't ask you to do anything at all. It's giving grief a place at the table, allowing it to sit beside you. Instead of asking, how do I get rid of this? Try asking, what does this part of me need right now? Often the answer isn't words, it's quiet, warmth and comfort, stillness. From a nervous system lens, this co-regulation is with yourself. Allowing grief to exist without resistance sends a signal of safety to the body. You're not being swallowed by it, you're sitting beside it, and sometimes that simple shift is enough to soften the edges for the day. So everything we've talked about so far, the honesty, boundaries, the pacing, the permission, is really about one thing: letting grief exist without being pushed away, not analyzing it, not trying to fix it, not asking it to hurry up, just allowing it to have a place. So if it feels okay, we're going to take a few minutes together now. Nothing intense, nothing you have to do perfectly. You are always in control, and you can keep your eyes open if that feels safer for you. This is a simple invitation. So before we move into this, I want to let you know what you're doing. This is a containment practice, a way of giving grief a place to rest for a moment, rather than holding it all in your body. Nothing is being pushed away, and nothing needs to change. If at any point this doesn't feel supportive, you can simply open your eyes, shift your body, or simply listen without imagining anything. So I invite you to find a comfortable position. Ensure that you're safe to do this containment exercise. So if it feels okay, close your eyes for a moment, or just simply soften your gaze. Begin by noticing your body where it is, the surface beneath you, the sense of being supported. Now imagine a container, something sturdy and gentle, perhaps a bowl, a box, a basket, a cabinet, or something entirely your own. There's no right image here. Just notice what feels safe for you. Take a moment to sense what grief might look like today. Not in detail, just a symbol. Maybe it's a color, a shape, a weight, a texture. You don't need to understand it, just notice what comes. Now gently imagine placing that representation of grief into the container. You're not getting rid of it. You're not dismissing it. You're simply laying it down to rest. The container can hold it without strain, without urgency, without judgment. You don't need to close the container unless that feels comforting for you. And if you do, know that it's not locked and it can be opened again whenever you choose. From this moment, grief is held somewhere other than your body. And as you imagine this, notice what happens inside you. Perhaps your shoulders soften. Maybe your breath deepens. Or maybe nothing changes at all. All responses are welcome. From a nervous system perspective, this is about creating enough safety for your body to rest and to pause, to stop bracing. Take one slow breath in through your nose and a longer exhale through your mouth. You may even quietly say to yourself, I can set this down for now. It means you're caring for yourself. When you're ready, gently bring your attention back to the room, perhaps noticing the sound, the lights, your sense of being here. This container is always available to you. You can return to it whenever the weight feels like too much. Thank you. Let's continue. I want to name why we do this. Grief doesn't need to be carried every moment in order for it to be honored. Sometimes the most caring thing we can do is let it rest, trusting that we can return to it when we have more capacity. When we place grief outside the body, even symbolically, the brain is able to create a little bit of space without denial. Nothing is being avoided or erased. That space helps prevent emotional flooding while keeping connection intact. And from a nervous system perspective, this kind of containment creates a sense of boundary and safety. It allows emotion to exist without overwhelming the body. In other words, grief is still here. It's just not being held alone. And that too is care. So as we come to the end of this episode, I want to invite you to settle into this moment, not the season, not what's coming next, just here. If grief has been walking beside you this holiday season, if joy has felt complicated, if your nervous system has been tired of holding it all together, please hear this. There is nothing wrong with you. You are simply responding to love, loss, and a world that has changed. Grief doesn't mean you're ungrateful. It just means something mattered. Whether the season has asked you to grieve, to rest, to laugh, or simply to get through the day, all of it belongs here. There's no single right way to move through this holiday season. So as you begin to move through the days ahead, let care be quieter than expectation. Let honesty matter more than performance. Let softness be a form of strength. You don't need to rush your healing. You don't need to do grief correctly. You're allowed to move slowly into whatever comes next. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your tenderness. And thank you for letting this be a place where grief is allowed to exist without being fixed. All right, so up next, the holidays end, the decorations come down, the bills start rolling in, routines return, and reality settles back in for us. And instead of feeling refreshed or motivated, a lot of us tend to feel flat, tired, or quietly overwhelmed. In our next episode, we'll explore the holiday hangover, that space between December and January where the season ends, but the exhaustion lingers, and the pressure to reset, set new goals, and reinvent yourself often shows up before you're fully recovered. So we'll talk about how to move forward in a way that actually honors where you are. Before we part, let's pause and take one last breath together, inhaling in, exhaling out. Whatever you're carrying doesn't need to be fixed right now, my friends. It doesn't need to be justified. It doesn't need to make sense yet. You're allowed to be human here, tender and brave, certain and unsure, healing and still hurting. Go gently with yourself, and if courage shows up even quietly, let that be enough for today. I'll be here with you next time. Take care.